I would like to welcome everyone to the Michigan Election Reform Alliance press conference. Today is December 19th, 2016. Our subject is Michigan's failed recount and what we can do to fix our broken election system. And I'm here with members of the Michigan Election Reform Alliance Council. We have Phil Shepard, Dr. Phil Shepard, Will White, Michael David Bendor, and Walt Sorg. And I thank everyone for joining us today. This is a really important moment in national and Michigan's history. And we're looking for a good idea of what our problems are and some solutions. I'm Jan Bendor. I am the statewide coordinator for the Michigan Election Reform Alliance. I'm also an accredited Michigan election administrator. I've been running elections for 16 years, and I have seen quite a few recounts in my time, both as an election administrator and as a candidate in a close election. MIRA is a 501c3 nonprofit. We are nonpartisan. We welcome people from all political backgrounds to join our work, and we have been working for 10 years to reform Michigan's elections and our national elections to make them more accurate, more transparent, and more accountable to the voters. So basing our work on a very important principle that without the right to vote, there are no other rights. And I am quoting Thomas Paine, who was an American revolutionary. Just about all of our other rights are based on our right to vote. So if we don't have that right, what do we have? As people were fond of saying in early American history, you either have the ballot or you have the bullet. Which do you want? I have another quote, though, that's, I think, very relevant to where we are right now. The people who cast the votes don't decide an election. The people who count the votes do. And that is a quote by a much less beloved figure, Joseph Stalin. But once in a while, you even have to agree with a dictator, because they know what they're talking about. Here in Michigan, unfortunately, we cannot trust the count of our votes. We have a really big problem. In this 2016 presidential election, Michigan's official results show a margin of 10,704 votes between the two top vote getters. This is the closest presidential result in the nation in 2016. So all eyes have been on Michigan. The state's margin was, listen carefully, 0.22%. That's not even a whole percent, okay? That's 1/4% of the 4.8 million votes cast for president. Our vote tabulators, as we have studied them, and we've conducted a number of studies, our vote tabulators have a demonstrated error rate of anything from 0.26% to 1.78% in a systematic study. And we've even seen instances where a precinct tabulator made a 3% mistake in just counting the number of ballots, not even counting the votes. So the question that has to come into everyone's mind, did the optical scan tabulators, as we use them in Michigan, and the DREs, as they're used in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, these are direct recording electronic devices that are not paper, did these machines decide who's the president? According to writer Jeff Greenfield, a total of 1/30 of 1% of the votes in these three states decided the election. That is a very, very tiny number of votes. Maybe they weren't real votes. And you know, we're never going to know who really won. Michigan's recount was stopped halfway through. Pennsylvania's never really got going. It got all tied up in court. And only some of Wisconsin's votes were on paper and therefore hand recountable. In some of their precincts, they actually did finish what was available to them to recount. The Michigan presidential recount was doomed from the start. And there are a number of reasons for this. In other states, a statewide recount is automatic if the margin is under 2 or 3%. If we had that law, we would have had an automatic statewide recount. A recount is in the public interest, and it would have been done at public expense so that everyone could have their faith restored. Unfortunately, Michigan has an automatic trigger for statewide elections that you almost never hear about. It's 2,000 votes. The margin was 10,000. We're never going to see a 2,000 vote margin, I don't think, in our lifetimes. So this trigger is really not useful. Since 2000, the only race that was anywhere close to this was in 2002 for the Attorney General. There was about a 4,000 vote margin, and there was still no automatic recount. So how do we get recounts in Michigan? Well, candidates are forced to petition for them, and they're forced to pay for them. And this, of course, becomes a political football. The public doesn't really have any way to weigh in on this. We're also saying here today that the 2016 recount would not have produced a useful result even if it had gone forward. Despite the valiant efforts of many election officials in these local recount centers, and some of them were heroic. In one county, they practically got their entire recount done in 2 days. That's phenomenal. In others, they got at least halfway through. When you think of the number of votes they were having to count, the ballots they were handling, just the paper, the number of paper cuts, that was valiant and courageous. But we have a fundamental problem with our recounts. Michigan election officials have misinterpreted the laws on recounts and the promulgated rules. And if you're interested in following up on this, it's MCL 168.872, which is the heart of our recount law, and .871, which talks about the Board of Canvassers, and we'll get to that. We also saw a violation of recount rules. Recount rules were promulgated in 1979, and I have brought a copy of them for people who aren't aware that in Michigan we actually have a way to promulgate rules. These rules, 14 pages of rules that govern recounts, were properly promulgated under the Michigan Administrative Procedures Act, which is MCL 24. We have lots and lots of Michigan departments that still use this process. This is guaranteed to make sure that bureaucrats don't make up rules as they go along, that the rules are actually part of Michigan law, and that the public has a chance to weigh in. So the DNR, the DEQ, lots of departments actually promulgate their rules. But the Michigan Bureau of Elections has not promulgated a rule properly since 1979 when they did these recount rules. So most of what you're hearing about how recounts are supposed to be done is just making stuff up. And here's some of the made-up rules that they were telling people to follow in the recount centers and the journalists who were told what the rules were. They were saying you can't recount a precinct if the ballot case seal is missing or it's broken or bearing a different number from the one recorded in the poll book. They were telling people you can't recount a precinct if the number of ballots in the ballot case differs from the number recorded in the poll book statement of votes. More made-up rules. Observers may not see the other election documents, such as tabulator totals tapes, poll book voter lists, applications to vote, and other precinct records that would allow a true audit of the election by the public. And this last set of rules was enforced in the Wayne County recount site, even though when we asked the director of the Bureau of Elections if this really was a rule, he contradicted it. So we have the Wayne County Corporation Council apparently just making up rules. This is not how you run a democracy, making up rules. And just to make sure that everybody has a chance to understand the two laws that I'm referring to, I don't usually just sit here and want to read laws to people, but these laws were so well written in 1954 that we really should take a minute to appreciate them. Section 872 says that a recount is a criminal investigation, potentially. Whenever a petition has been filed for a recount by any person conceiving himself aggrieved on account of any fraud, wrongdoing, or violation of the law, and it shall appear to the Board of Canvassers having jurisdiction that there is probably, not probable, but probably cause to believe there has been fraud, wrongdoing, or a violation of law, which could also be a mistake, a violation of omission, then the said canvasser shall make full and complete investigation of same. Said canvasser shall have full power and authority to subpoena witnesses, open any ballot box, regardless of the condition in which same may be found, and they may break open, if sealed, the seal and examine the ballots contained therein. And if after the investigation said board has good reason to believe that any fraud, wrongdoing, or violation has been committed, the Board of Canvassers shall forthwith make a written report to the prosecuting attorney and the circuit judge or judges of the county. That's some heavy-duty authority. So what we actually got was an Alice in Wonderland version of our recount. If you were using the same logic that was used last week, if a bank were robbed and the missing money caused the bank's financial records to become incorrect, the police would not be allowed to investigate the robbery. That's catch-22. It just makes no sense at all. So let's kind of recap here. What a petition for a recount says on its face in boilerplate is the petitioner is stating that they believe there has been mistake or fraud. The filer of the petition does not have to make a case for fraud. That's the purpose of the recount. So we can't tell petitioners, no, you've got to have some evidence before we do this. And the law provides the County Board of Canvassers with authority to conduct a criminal investigation. Now, because the Michigan recount was forced to stop, Michigan failed to investigate some very suspicious evidence. We just left that on the table. And I don't think this benefited any of the parties involved. It certainly didn't benefit the two presidential candidates who were so close. In Michigan, we had 75,000 undervoted ballots. 45,000 was a number in the Metro Detroit area. Now, what's an undervoted ballot? This is a ballot that has no mark in the space for the presidential candidates. Who does that? Most people vote in a presidential election because they want to vote for president. There could be a few people who didn't care and they would vote down ballot. 75,000 is more than we've had at least since 2000, the year 2000, when we started keeping better records. That's very suspicious. Undervoted ballots by all experts in election integrity are a suspicious sign that indicates either the scanners are malfunctioning or worse, that the program actually could have been compromised. We have other things that never got investigated. We had a lot of blank ballots found in cases from the absentee count boards. And I personally witnessed this at the Cobo Hall Recount Center when I was an observer. In 6 precincts, there were over a dozen blank folded ballots. Now, if you're an absentee voter, as I am, and a lot of people are, would you waste a 2-ounce stamp to mail in a blank ballot? In 16 years, I have seen a lot of ballots, and I have not seen absentee voters do that. Why would they? They might occasionally make the mistake of sending in an empty ballot envelope, but they're not going to pay to send a blank. Why are we seeing all these blank ballots? These would also register as undervotes. In the processing at the recount centers, the ballots were hand-stacked before they were counted. They were stacked into categories. So you had Jill Stein ballots, you had Trump ballots, you had Clinton ballots, all of the people on the printed ballot. And then you had a sixth category, which was a catch-all. So you had the Mickey Mouse votes, which were an extraordinarily high number in Wisconsin, by the way. There's actually been a published article on this. You had the overvotes, where there were people who would vote for all the candidates. You would have the blank ballots. You would have the undervoted ballots. These are all lumped together, and at most recount centers, they were never broken down into subcategories. So you just had other, if they were counted at all. We've heard from observers at some of the recount centers that the other category was never even counted. Well, how can you reconcile numbers if you don't have all of your categories totaled and then grand totaled? This defies accounting 101. This kind of irregularity should not have happened in a recount. We also have many, many observer accounts of witnesses who saw illegal conduct, including one witness who was in the basement of Cobo Hall and saw a large number of people with a large number of ballot cases, opening the cases and taking ballots out of them. That should be investigated. It will never be investigated, apparently. And we also saw, as the newspapers have already covered very thoroughly, all the problems in the Wayne County Recount Center. The very well publicized disarray, missing ballots, missing poll books. When is that going to get investigated? Is anybody going to be accountable for that? You know, all the people who run elections, and I'm one of them, we all take an oath to uphold the Constitution and the laws of the state of Michigan. Somebody didn't do that. And I think if we are a state of laws and a nation of laws, there ought to be accountability. Elections are too important. We don't have bank examiners who are that sloppy. That's pretty important stuff. Why would we let our elections be so poorly done? We also have another big problem that's not going to get reported in any official way. And it might not even have been touched on by the recount had it been finished. We have widespread breakdowns of optical scan tabulators. And for a lot of detail on that, I would refer you to our Michigan Election Reform Alliance publication, which we put out in January of 2014, where we predicted there would be massive breakdowns. We had analyzed the breakdowns we'd already had in 2012. Which were shocking. We have tabulators jamming. We have tabulators failing to scan. This is a typical optical scan tabulator. It works because it has a little light bulb in it that actually is vital to the scanning function. If you store this tabulator in your garage attic unheated, guess what happens to that little light bulb? It's probably going to crack and not work. We have these memory cards, which this is the entire election right here. This is the program that creates the ballot and it counts the votes on the marked ballots. This is obsolete. Nobody is making these anymore. Literally, the company is no longer in existence that we're relying on. These are failing at a very high rate, just like you have your camera flash cards will fail. It's not very stable memory. As an election administrator, I had a near heart attack when a machine and a memory card I had tested at 6:30, 2 weeks before, at 6:30 in the morning, it would not work. It simply failed. And that was a 40-mile round trip to go get another one, and that one wasn't tested. So now I had to run an election with an untested memory card. Not good. That's really not a position you want to be in. What happens when machines break down and fail and jam? They jam, by the way, often because they haven't been used in a long time. And you know what happens to a car that sits for months? The wheels get square. That's what happens to the rollers in here. They get square. They don't work very well. What happens is that it's going to take at least an hour to replace it or fix it. What happens to the voters? Well, they get to stand in a nice long line that gets longer and longer and longer. The voters who don't want to wait can submit their ballot to an auxiliary compartment on the side of the box that this sits on. But a lot of voters don't trust that. You know, they will very grudgingly say, I can't wait anymore. I guess this is all I can do. And even though we reassure them that their votes will be counted after 8 o'clock at the end of the polls, many people don't trust that, and you can understand why. So what's the cost of failing tabulators? What we often call a time tax. When people have to wait, when they miss work, when they're late to get their kids from daycare, that's a time tax that no voters should have to pay. And according to the Pew research, Michigan is the 5th worst in the country in our waiting time for voters to wait. Already, we don't need more breakdowns. Our tabulators are now 13 and 14 years old. They weren't all that great when we bought them. They were 1970s test score scanners. I've often held up one of these devices and asked people, what do you think this cost? And they'll tell me $150, $200. You know what we paid for these? $4,000 each. And they're just 1970s junk. So why are we punting on this crisis? Well, Michigan says they don't have the money. Okay, why wasn't a plan made to come up with the money? We need to decide how we're going to count our votes in the future. And we need to have a method that's going to be accurate, honest, and transparent. The problem with electronic vote counting is it isn't transparent. We have over 5,000 voting precincts. We have over 2,000 absentee count boards. They're all depending on these machines that are already out of their original warranty. And we've done another study that shows how bad their counts get after only a short amount of time. If you want more details, it's in here. But this is where we research the error rate of the machines and showed that the machine error rate is actually higher than the 0.22% margin in this election. So what we're saying is that we've got to do something very soon. We're going to have more close elections. In 2012, we had over 24 races decided by 1%. We have very close elections in this state. The first congressional district was decided by 0.46%. We have judicial races, we have state house races. I don't think we want the machines to be running our democracy. That's not usually our principles. The first thing that the Michigan Election Reform Alliance has proposed, and we've had a bill prepared for over 2 years since we did the Cliff Report, would be to set up a blue ribbon commission on election integrity. And that commission would have representatives of key stakeholders, voters, election administrators, experts in security, statistics, computers. We would have statewide public hearings. There would be a public comment period. This would be similar to what they've done in Colorado and California. In California, they had a top-to-bottom review statewide of every single device they were using in elections. And the public was able to weigh in. And they got rid of a lot of their equipment because it just didn't come up to standards. We need to then look at all the alternatives that are available. We need to make cost comparisons. If we spend another $65 million on more of this same junk, and it's only going to last for 8 to 10 years, is that really a smart investment? Think about it. There might be some better ways to do things. We don't have state standards for principles of election security integrity. You can still cart voted ballots around in paper bags, take them to your precincts to be counted. Election administrators really don't have chain of custody requirements. You'd think there would be by now, but there aren't. The second thing that we're proposing, and we're delighted that we have co-sponsors that we hope there'll be more, who are bipartisan, is a plan for election audits. While we're still stuck with these old machines, And even if we get new ones, they're going to have their own set of problems. We need to audit our elections, just like you can audit your bank account. The IRS audits tax returns. Let's have a way to do that. And our proposal, which is quite extensive, and it's posted on our website, Michigan Election Reform Alliance, if you want to see the details. But we would propose establishing an audit authority under a separate branch of government, the Michigan Department of Civil Rights, which is a constitutionally created department of Michigan government. Because after all, banks don't audit themselves. There's an outside bank examiner who comes in. That's a principle of auditing. We would follow the national guidelines of the State Audits Working Group, and you can read these at electionaudits.org. Our proposal would have an election night audit of one race in every precinct, and this would just be as a safeguard to detect obvious malfunctions of whatever counting we're doing. And we would have post-election audits of statistically based samples of precincts. And if these preliminary audits found serious problems, then we could escalate, even to a full recount if it was warranted. I predict that with a good audit system, we'd probably have very few recounts. We would have very few that would ever be needed because we could see what was going on with confidence. This is a map of the United States showing what states are doing for transparency and accountability. There are 18 states that already have paper ballots required and manual hand count audits. 18 states. Where are we? We should be in that group. And we think that federal and state reforms are way overdue. We don't want the ballot box to be a trash can. We'd like to have a plan. We have a plan. Ours has been up since 2006, if you want to read it. And our challenge is to secure the right to vote and to make sure that our votes are counted. It's kind of a new movement. If you haven't heard about it, please join us. We need to hold election officials accountable to standards. We need public control. We need to enforce the laws that we have. We have some really good laws on the books, but they're not enforced in the most part. And we need public support. Perhaps now that we've had so much attention to all these problems, and particularly in the 3 states, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, we'll get more attention. We need constituent pressure to institute these reforms so that our legislature pays attention and solves these problems. And we'll hope there will be public hearings where citizens can weigh in. And if people are interested in more of the details, please visit our website, MichiganElectionReformAlliance.org. And we're happy to take questions and comments from anyone who is concerned. Thank you.
What do you see lawmakers being able to tackle directly? I know as the recount was going on, the only legislation that came out of that was a bill to make people pay for recounts. What in your mind is more productive policy that the state could be considering?
I would like to see the Blue Ribbon Commission established right away. It should be set up in January. Let's go. If we're efficient about it, we could have some decisions and plans made within a year. Now, our bill allows for 2 years, but that was in 2014. I think we're in the crisis now. So let's get a public process. It concerns me when the Secretary of State talks about going out and just spending some random money without any public input. That's a concern. If California and Colorado can involve their voters, we should too. So I think the Blue Ribbon Commission is the problem-solving system. It's that important. And then while we're waiting for a new system, we should be implementing audits. We should be doing audits at the next election in Michigan. Instead, what we seem to be doing is rearranging the chairs on the Titanic, and that's not going to help.
Jen, could you mention gaming in context?
Yeah, I think there's a really instructive comparison between how we treat our elections and how we treat our legalized gambling system. It might come as a shock to a lot of people that there are over 100 people who work for the Gaming Commission whose job is just to monitor gambling and make sure it's fair. They actually examine the one-armed bandits. They have the source code. They go in and look to make sure that code has not been rigged. In Michigan, we can't see the source code in this memory card. It's proprietary. So we're doing a heck of a good job protecting gambling, but we are not protecting our vote at all.
Isn't it true that some Michigan counties used to hand count the ballots, and are there other states that do hand count audits?
Well, there are 18 states that are doing hand count audits of some kind. Minnesota was the first. They do an automatic hand count audit of every election. I would say probably the best system is New Mexico's, because they don't do a rigid percent. They actually have a statistical model. So the closer the election, the more votes you audit. And it's much more cost effective. In Michigan, we think there are still some little tiny townships where they hand count their votes. It's just not worth it to them to set up all this equipment. But we've been surveying to see if there are still some. And we know that under Michigan law, a local clerk has the authority to hand count votes if they suspect their machine is malfunctioning. So hand counts are still done. Humans are actually very accurate.
Those 1979 procedures passed through the administrative rulemaking process, are those still in effect?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. They're on the website
And
of.
those weren't followed.
Yeah, no, this is the State Office of Administrative Hearings and Rules. These are still on their website. That office still exists. They have a very important job, and that's to control bureaucrats so they don't go off making up rules that don't have any basis in law. I respect their work. I just wish that the Secretary of State would comply with that law.
I found it very strange when I was observing that one clerk insisted, I'm losing it here.
Well, there are a lot of people who saw very strange things as they were observing the recounts. We have dozens and dozens of reports. We put out an appeal to the observers, and we're still going through the response. People were very upset at some of the things that they saw or were subjected to. And I haven't even mentioned some of the bullying that took place by some of the recount observers on other observers, who were people who were intent on running out the clock and did not want the recount to take place.